Season's greetings and welcome to Projector, and on this episode, a festive favourite gets a new spin, and for some reason, Boy George is the ghost of Christmas future in Christmas Karma. Ishan Su, played by Kunal Nair, is a notoriously stingy and ill-tempered businessman who loathes Christmas. But on Christmas night, he is visited by the ghost of his business partner, Jacob Marley, played by Hugh Bonneville, who warns him that he will be visited by the spirits of Christmas past, present and future, played by Eva Longoria, Billy Porter and Boy George, respectively. Will the ghost convince Sue to put behind his business and embrace Christmas? Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol might be one of the most adapted books to film ever, if not the most. It's pretty easy to see why. Dickens' commentary on greed and capitalism, particularly on inequality and children living in poverty, continues to resonate even now when we're still facing many of these problems. If anything, it's gotten even more stark with the rise of billionaires, making that disparity between the richest and the poorest ever more vast, and it's somewhat depressing that a critique of Victorian society is so relevant over 180 years after it was first published. But in terms of film and TV adaptations, you've got plenty to choose from, and you can pick your Scrooge from Jim Carrey, Alistair Sim, Albert Finney, Patrick Stewart, Kelsey Grammer, and many others. And what's remarkable is how malleable the story is, and the ways it's been riffed on and reworked over the years, particularly in modern riffs, like Bill Murray in Scrooge. Oh hey, it's actually on my shirt right here, which is a favourite of mine, even if it isn't really of Bill Murray's. I was also quite partial to Ryan Reynolds and Will Ferrell in Apple TV's Spirited, which hasn't quite become a festive favourite like others I've mentioned. But that doesn't mean that all takes on A Christmas Carol are good. There was a terrible animated film with Kate Winslet and Nicolas Cage, and for my money, the absolute worst version of it was Stephen Knight's recent BBC adaptation with Guy Pearce, which was deeply mean-spirited and unpleasant, trying to be pointlessly edgy. Enter Gurinder Chadha, who gives us the latest modern take on the Dickens story. She's of course best known for Bend It Like Beckham, and you might recall that I actually quite enjoyed her last film, the Springsteen-inspired Blinded by the Light. This is her first film in 6 years, and in the past she's been no stranger to doing modern updates on classic literature with an Asian spin, as she's had success with the Austen riff Bride and Prejudice. And you can clearly see what the intention behind Christmas Karma is. It wants to be a proudly British and multicultural update of the story, and at a time where the UK is so divided and there's so much underlying prejudice being whipped up, this feels like the right moment for this exact version of the story, if done well. So it's deeply unfortunate that it isn't. Christmas Karma isn't the worst version of this story, but it's also wildly misjudged. The sad part is the setup is quite a brilliant idea. If you're going to tell something that has been adapted so many times before, you need to have some sort of angle on it, and I think this does. This version makes Scrooge, or Sood as he's known here, into a first-generation immigrant, and his dislike of Christmas stems from his own anger at his sense of displacement that he takes out upon everyone else. Like Scrooge typically, he's cocooned himself in his wealth, but that's only made himself more isolated. You see this in his interactions with everyone, from his nephew Raj, who is this film's version of Fred, who he declines to go to his Christmas party and resents him marrying a white British woman, to berating Indian shopkeeper Singh, played by Nitin Ganatra, for his poor business sense in buying excessive Christmas stock that he won't be able to sell after the holiday. Both are expressions of misplaced anger directed towards everyone else in his general vicinity. And this is definitely a secular film, where it's less about Christmas as a religious holiday and more as a tradition that brings people and families together from all different backgrounds to celebrate and be unified. Chadha's script tries to be faithful to the spirit and structure of Dickens' source material, even quoting the original lines on several occasions, but Sood arguably takes the Scroogian miserliness to a whole other level. His penny pinching means not only does his office staff have to work in cold conditions with their thermostat locked at 15 degrees C, huddling under coats and gloves just to keep warm, which surely must be illegal. He then fires the entire office on Christmas Eve when they disobey that. Likewise, he also forces his housekeeper, Mrs. Joshi, played by Shabu Kapoor, to work in the dark so that she doesn't put up his electricity bill. If anything, this somewhat over-eggs things, as the point of the story is to ultimately redeem Scrooge, and that typically works best when the character is actually someone you want to see have redemption. It's a difficult balance, but someone like Bill Murray makes his grumpiness amusing, even though he's petty and vindictive. It's kind of funny. Sue just comes across as unpleasant and cruel, especially in scene after scene of him insulting people for about half an hour before the ghosts even show up. Of course, it doesn't help that Kunal Nair is severely miscast in the lead role. Best known for his part in The Big Bang Theory, at just 44, he's way too young to be playing someone in their 60s or 70s, no matter how much grey you throw into his hair or how low he makes his voice. Bilal Hasner plays the younger adult version of Sood in flashbacks, and he's only 18 years or so younger than Nair, who still looks young enough that he could have played the character in his 20s if he wanted to. But the main problem is that Nair is visibly struggling, especially with the more emotional parts of the story, and in the dramatic moments that's very apparent. It feels like Nair is trying so hard to play old that he's stiff in a completely different sense than intended. He's really unconvincing most of the time, with frankly wooden line deliveries. It's rather telling that he seems most relaxed at the end of the film when Sood is trying to make up for his behaviour, and Nair is basically playing him like his Big Bang Theory character, and is exuberant and animated and his voice is high, and he just stops playing him as an old man completely. Nair might be the only Scrooge who is better at playing the redeemed character than the nasty one. But even the angle with Sood ultimately ends up being misjudged when we finally get a look at his backstory with the Ghost of Christmas Past, revealing that he came to Britain during the Asian expulsion from Uganda by Idi Amin. This might be the first Christmas film in history to feature archival footage of notorious Ugandan dictator Idi Amin, and I'm not sure that's a combination we ever needed. I commend Chada for trying to cover a historical moment that is so rarely seen and discussed, but it's one that the movie cannot hold. It feels wildly out of place in the context of what's supposed to be a big, uplifting, festive movie, and honestly, it's simply too heavy for it. It's ultimately rather depressing. It's a huge bit of tonal whiplash to have a movie where Danny Dyer keeps popping up as a singing cabbie, and maybe in a more serious-minded film, it wouldn't have felt so wrong as it does here. It's very strange, because this section covering Sood's past is arguably the strongest portion of it, with the film's most attuned sense of cultural identity, and yet it is also undeniably the most problematic. It's maybe not a surprise when I say that watching the film I found it to be a strangely uncomfortable experience. I also think the tone is off in general. There's another scene in this section where Sood is subjected to a hate attack in an alley, and the scene is set to Boy George singing over it. To say the visuals and the music are wildly mismatched would be an understatement. And it isn't the only time, because what absolutely sinks this is the fact that it's a musical, and oh boy, it is rough to sit through a bad musical, and Christmas Karma is especially poor in its execution. When I think of someone to lead a wide array of musical styles and genres, my first choice probably wouldn't be Gary Barlow of Take That fame. The songs are mostly straight up bad, with hugely on the nose lyrics when they're not rhyming karma with karma. I could tell I was going to have a rough time from the second song in, when Sood's office workers start rapping about their situation, which triggered my involuntary cringe reflex, especially when they start breakdancing on the floor. That's when I started to notice just how terrible the lip syncing is, even worse than an old episode of Top of the Pops. In contrast to many movies these days which record their vocals live on set, and that comes with drawbacks of its own, as people who sat through Les Miserables and Cats will tell you, Christmas Karma pre-recorded their tracks, but watching Ben Bailey Smith sound like he's spitting bars into a studio microphone, but visually he's just casually muttering into someone's ear, downright disorientated my senses. And he's not the only one. Pixie Lott plays Mrs. Cratchit, the wife of Sue's most loyal worker Bob Cratchit, played by Leo Sutter, and the same thing happens multiple times during her number, The Boy Inside the Man. Yeah, even the title is bad in that case, where it isn't so much that the words are not syncing up with her mouth, but more the way that she's saying them. It's downright bizarre. It's quite hard to describe without actually seeing it. Oh, and I have to mention, while we're talking about the Cratchits, of course there's a Tiny Tim who in this version, I kid you not, doesn't just say, "God bless everyone." He also exclaims, "And God bless the NHS." I mean, I agree with the sentiment, but if I cringed any harder, my face would turn into my bumhole. But anyway, back to the music, and it's genuinely hard to fathom how a movie with so many well-known musical talents both in front and behind the camera, that such a major part of the film has turned out so poorly. And it isn't even just the syncing. Sometimes the way the lyrics are mixed means they get completely lost amidst the music, although that might actually be doing them a favour in that case, but also just the way the numbers are staged as well. Clearly the film was working on an extremely tight budget, and it doesn't really help that the British stiff upper lip means that we are terrible at cutting loose, but the musical numbers are very awkwardly done. Maybe the greatest example of this is when they try to do a Bollywood-style musical number at Raj's Christmas party, and when you think of that, you think of big, grand, epic spectacle, lots of colour and vibrancy everywhere. And they try to do that with about 20 or 30 people stuffed into a front living room like sardines. It's so claustrophobic. They look like they can hardly move, let alone dance. Why didn't they just open things up somehow to let them perform? At least Barlow has a bit of self-awareness as he pops up with Chada in behind-the-scenes footage and outtakes during the credits, and jokingly says, "There's no one left in the cinema right now. They've all left." Which is pretty funny, and maybe a bit more accurate than intended. Worse, the songs also badly hamper the pacing as well. The film opens with 3 songs almost back to back with each other, and that massively slows down the film's opening stretch. It feels like it takes the film a very long time to get to the ghost, especially for a story that almost everyone is familiar with already, mostly because these songs focus on the side characters instead of Sood. The net result of that is that when the main portion of the story arrives, the actual engine of the story, it feels somewhat rushed through. And speaking of those ghosts, there are likewise some very strange choices. Hugh Bonneville appears very briefly as Marley and is almost entirely unrecognisable, as his ghost form is a digital double rather than makeup, which might account for why his scene is over so quickly in this incarnation, because he's probably blowing through most of the budget. Eva Longoria's Ghost of Christmas Past is clearly a play on the Day of the Dead, complete with a full-blown mariachi band, which is just odd for a British film. I know the film is purposefully a mixing pot of cultures, but the Mexican holiday isn't as well known in the UK, so it comes a bit out of left field, and Longoria herself looks like she isn't quite certain how she got here, complete with a glowing projector head. It's also very clear that Longoria especially only had very limited availability, because she is quite obviously green screened into a few of the Uganda scenes, because we either hear her lines off camera or we'll suddenly cut to her in a really tight close-up with the background CGI'd in. We even see the green screen in the BTS at the end. It does feel like Longoria and Billy Porter are largely here so it'll be easier to export to America, but to Porter's credit, when his time does come on screen, no matter how briefly, it works as a musical. Porter has charisma to spare, and his big gospel number is by far the best performed and staged number in the entire film. He almost single-handedly demonstrates the poise and confidence that is lacking elsewhere. This is literally as camp as Christmas, and Porter embraces that as the showman he is. Unfortunately, he isn't given nearly enough screen time in my opinion. And as for Boy George as the Ghost of Christmas Future, yes, really. I think he's keenly aware that he's not an actor, because he doesn't have any actual lines. Instead, he only sings during the songs, in particular the several versions of Pain of the Past, which go throughout the entire film, well before he physically turns up. Even still, it is a bizarre casting choice for the ages, looking uncomfortable under his massive cape, scarred makeup, and with metal claws for hands, and is more likely to provoke cries of absolute bewilderment from the audience going, "Is that really Boy George?" Yep, It sure is. Is Christmas Karma the worst British festive movie? No. Not when Nativity 3 Dude Where's My Donkey exists. But it isn't very good. Honestly, if they dropped the musical angle and focused more on the character's cultural identity, I think it would have been better, but this is honestly badly misjudged and plays out cheap and sloppily on screen, especially in the special effects department. I do have to admit though, that it wasn't the kind of bad film that I get a lot of joy from, because I think its heart is so clearly in the right place, it's so damn well intentioned, and they clearly had a lot of fun making it from the behind the scenes sing-along that we see in the credits. I just felt kind of sad for everyone that this was the end result. This is certainly one of the weakest versions of Dickens' tale, and its ambition is well beyond its grasp. The result is just a mess. Despite the talent involved, Christmas Karma, it's a big old turkey. If you like this review and you want to support my work, you can give me a tip at my Ko-fi page, or my YouTube Super Thanks feature which is right below the video. Or you can give me a gift at my Patreon, where you can see my videos early among other perks, including access to my Discord server, and you can also join YouTube memberships for similar perks. Or you can just simply like, share and hype the video, it genuinely helps. I'm Matthew Buck, saying Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays. Stay safe everyone.